What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Saturday morning college football show here on RotoGrinders. Justin Van Zuden, aka STL Cardinals 84, here with you. You might be able to catch my voice being a little shaky. I am recovering from a battle with bronchitis this week. Went 2 days without a voice at all. Yesterday, I was back to maybe about 40 or 50%. I'd say today maybe we're closer to 60%. So we're on the mend, but my voice still gets a little squeaky at times. My 12-year-old has been making fun of me throughout the week. I have told him that he will have all of that coming back to him and then some in a year or so when he hits puberty. So I will give him all the crap right back in the next year or so. But thankfully, starting to feel a little bit better. I'll let my buddy Micah Bedard do most of the heavy lifting to rest my voice a little bit. But Micah, how you doing this morning?
I'm good, Justin. Yeah, we're a team, so if one of us is down, the other's got to pick each other up. So,
That's right.
No worries there. I know we're getting into college football, but I know you're a golf guy. How inexcusable is it for Davis Love to sit Cantlay and Schauffele this morning against the international team? It's ridiculous, and that has nothing
I'm not
to do
sure
with
what they're doing. Maybe he's got some bets going. He figures they've already got it won, so they're just gonna mess around and do whatever the next couple days. Maybe they drew straws in the clubhouse. Maybe they played a game of poker and the losers had to sit out. I don't know. It's clearly nothing related to the talent, but surprised me as well. I mean, I think if the score was like 5-4 or 4-4 or whatever, as opposed to a blowout, you would have seen him out there. But I don't know, a little bit strange and unfortunate that it's such a blowout because it's not going to make the TV very riveting. Not that the TV, this is where I thought you were going with it. The TV coverage has been brutal.
Ooh,
so
horrible.
It's just, I don't get it. Show golf shots. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
But so sorry to those of you who maybe had that pairing in your DFS lineups this week, because the President's Cup DFS is all about strategy. And after that first day, it kind of got flushed down the toilet a little bit. All right. Well, we've got an interesting slate of college football in front of us today. What do we got? 3, 6, 9, 13 games on the DraftKings slate, I believe. Might be 14 games on the Fanduel slate. We're starting to get into conference play here, so a few less blowouts and some more exciting games on the slate. We do have still a couple of non-conference games, but just your thoughts on the way the slate shakes out here today with teams getting into conference play.
Yeah, last week was kind of our last, hybrid week, had a few conference games, but now you're getting into the meat of it. I think the only non-conference game you have here is Central Michigan and Penn State and Indiana Cincy. So definitely getting into a lot more of close spread, high total games. So that's definitely what we want to see here. And I think there are a ton of options today. I don't think anyone's going to I think there are a couple guys who are going to be really chalky, but outside of them, plenty of options, plenty of high totals. I think there's really only one game with a total in the 40s this week. So there are a ton of options, and off 13-game slate, it just lets you spread it out a little bit. And, there's some definitely overlooked spots just because there are so many good games.
Yeah, and that does help to spread out ownership to some degree. So there's a couple of misprices, and there always are going to be some. And you can see just right now, I still have all the positions selected on DraftKings. And we see a lot of guys in that 15, 20, 12, 11 ownership range. Not a lot of 50s and 60s or just the glaring guys that you need to play up top. So I think that makes it a little bit more interesting. And there's always going to be injuries and stuff, that are going to make a few players underpriced, and that's just going to happen. But I'm not sure if we've got a ton of situations as far as game time decisions today. We do have some injuries that have come out throughout the week that have given us the value that you're going to see on this slate. Keeping an eye on Josh Downs is always, he says he's ready to go. That is a 3:30 kick between North Carolina and Notre Dame. So I'm assuming he's going to be out there. But if you're going to play him, particularly if you're going to play him in some stacks, always a good idea to make sure he's out there and dressed and ready to go when the warm-ups happen. But what are you keeping an eye on as far as game day news today?
I think earlier it was announced Donovan Edwards. We'll have to wait for warm-ups, but Donovan Edwards, a backup running back from Michigan, is not going to play. I don't think that really takes his backup into consideration, but you saw it was Blake Corum had, I think, 14 touches last week against UConn, and he had 5 touchdowns. So I think it definitely bumps Corum a little bit. that's really early all you're looking for in terms of injury news. I think Josh Downs is a really guy in the afternoon. But other than that, not a huge slate where we're worried about, guys not playing at the last second. So I think that bumps Corum a little bit. I think that makes him a really good play because I think gets force-fed probably. But we've seen in the past with Michigan, they do, take the backup and just basically give him at least a couple snaps. So Edwards' replacement, I think it's CJ. I'm blanking on the backup that they're going to be putting in there. But CJ Stokes, sorry. So I mean, he'll probably get some carries, but I think Corum gets a bunch of the work.
Yeah, the other kind of big news from this morning, Tillman, the top wide receiver for Tennessee, has been officially ruled out. So he is out today. I was trying to sort for whatever reason, when I sort my lineup HQ, I was sorting it by running backs from Michigan, and it gave me all the top guys here. I'm going to refresh that and see if that fixes itself. But anyway, Tillman for Tennessee, he is out today. Ottman Bell for Minnesota is out. Maybe some value wide receivers we can target there. And we'll get into these situations when we break down the positions. But the good news is we've gotten information. Edwards, who you mentioned, is out. So it's not like we're waiting on a ton of guys for game time news, which makes the lineup building in the early stage a little bit easier. Finley, the quarterback for Auburn, he is out. So not a whole lot that we are waiting on. All right, let's try this again. Yeah, so there we go. CJ Stokes, the running, he's 3,900, and we've got these Michigan projections updated, it looks like. So we've got him at 10 fantasy points now. And again, we'll get into these situations as we go through the positions. Just like to touch on the injuries at the top. Most of them are known at this point. Downs, the big one in the afternoon games to keep an eye on. All right, let's start as usual with the quarterback position. And Sean Clifford is now the most expensive quarterback on the slate. That's very strange to see. Obviously, matchups have priced that up there, but you've got Hooker, you've got Daniels, which was a good call by you last week, and that Kansas team. Really cool to see them having some success for the fans that have stuck with them through the years and decades of misery. You've got Mordecai up there. You've got McCarthy now for Michigan, who appears to have taken that job. Kind of that top 5 group of quarterbacks here. How are you breaking those guys down?
Yeah, usually DraftKings isn't like as reactive in pricing. Usually it takes them a little while to bump up. So Clifford, I didn't even look offhand. He was in the 5. He had to have been in the 5Ks last week, and now he gets like a 3K price bump. Although we did see Central Michigan basically let Spencer Sanders of Oklahoma State break the slate earlier in the season. I don't think I'm going to get there just because it's a 28-point spread. He definitely could get there, but you're really going to need him to do that probably pretty early in this one. And Sean Clifford likes to get injured every single game. So I'm probably off of Clifford here. We talk about him every week. He's on the slate. Hendon Hooker should probably be like 9K. He hasn't had that. I think the most fantasy points he's had is like 33 points, but it's just waiting to come. Against Pitt, he probably should have had 40. And he gets 2 passes dropped down at the 1, and then Jabari Small runs those in. So I like Hooker. He's a dual threat guy. Jalen Daniels, like I said, last week he gets a big price bump. But, I mean, this Kansas offense is fun to watch. I mentioned that Kansas, this is the second sellout Kansas has had at home in the last 13 years. So that is kind of crazy there. So I like him. Mordecai is the one guy of this group who's just a stationary guy. So, I mean, if you play Tanner Mordecai, we'll get to that in receivers. I would play Rashee Rice with him. Then McCarthy's interesting. He's going to get the reins here. First real test of the season. Michigan's played one of the worst schedules of FBS opponents yet to date. So I don't really know how much I like J.J. McCarthy. But those 2 guys right below him, I like Baby Tua and Sam Hartman. I'm a little bit higher on Maryland. And Michigan just, like I said, hasn't played anybody. So everyone likes to play Baby Tua when he's chalky. Like when he's unowned here, I kind of like the play. And Sam Hartman, I think Wake has a good chance to win this game outright. And I think Hartman Perry stacks are great, especially when you're going to get him at lower ownership. I think they come out there with a chip on their shoulder, losing by 21 at Clemson last year. Clemson's offense is just not that good. So I like as GPP plays, you see all those guys in the top 5 are probably going to be double-digit owned. I like Baby 2 and Sam Hartman as some GPP pivots in that range. I think the Robo Mike's back.
That was me that time. I had myself. I am occasionally muting myself on purpose in case I have to cough. So that time it was me. But I like those calls. I think it's really easy to overreact to the non-conference schedule when all these teams have played teams with varying levels of talent, and like you saw with Florida beating Utah to start the year. Like, you just don't know how good some of these teams are until we see the schedules in the conference play out. So I do agree. I think Wake is a live dog today. I don't know about Maryland winning on the road, but I wouldn't surprise me to see Tagovailoa have a decent game. Heck, he can't let older Tua have all the glory after that big comeback against the Ravens on Sunday last week. So we'll see what the family can pull for an encore. But I think this range is really interesting. I mean, we got a quarterback injury at TCU too, so we've got Duggan back in there. Bryant isn't getting any ownership, and even Drake May at 6,900. Look, UNC is going to have to score every week because their defense is so putrid that they just get the ball right back, and that's great for fantasy purposes because it gets the ball back in your quarterback's hands and he can chuck it down the field. Particularly if Downs is back today. May's pretty cheap there at 6.9K. So I don't think you need to go top with the top 5 quarterbacks if you don't want to. And you can take a couple of guys in this range or maybe even a little lower and get similar upside. Like you can see Duggan, we only have projected a couple points worse than Clifford. So this is just an interesting 7K range.
Yeah, Duggan's interesting because he kind of came into the season. Chandler Morris was really the starter. Morris gets hurt. I think Duggan, A, this is going to be a rivalry game. B, he's really playing for his job. And you don't I played this guy as much as I could the last couple of years. So him in, Sonny Dykes offense now, I like Duggan a lot. I think that SMU's defense, gave up 34 points, I think, to Maryland last week. I think Duggan is a great play, and you don't necessarily have to pair him with anybody. You can play him with Quentin Johnson, but right now, no one on TCU has more than 10 targets on the season. So Duggan is definitely in play. You mentioned Donovan. All these guys are live down here. Donovan Smith, he's not very good, but he's in the best offense a quarterback could want in the country under Zach Kittley for Texas Tech. Texas defense looked a little bit better, obviously, against Alabama, but now they go on the road here. Drake May, as you mentioned, too, he's had a great year, even without Josh Downs for most of the season. So I think he's in play. And then Anthony Richardson, people are going to keep playing him, me included. It's got to come around, right? The talent's got to be there. Had a couple really struggling games against USF and the week before against Kentucky. But the running's already there. Still crazy to me that he does not have a passing touchdown on the season. But I think he rights that ship here. Then you kind of have a dead zone once you get below 6K. I mean, I'm not going to play any of these guys. I mentioned, I don't know what happened with DJ Uiagalelei for Clemson. I mean, he came in a couple years ago when Trevor Lawrence was out and beat Notre Dame on the road in a primetime game, and he's done nothing since then. So anywhere below Richardson all the way down to 6K, I don't want anything of. But all those guys, Duggan, Smith, May, Richardson, are all live for GPP.
Yeah, I think you get an interesting ceiling there with Richardson, with some people maybe being a little too nervous, but the price tag isn't that bad. And then I agree that it's just kind of a dead zone. I do think Riley Leonard at 6K is an intriguing play. That game could shoot out. Kansas games are interesting again from a DFS perspective because they can put up points, but it's not like they still, they have an elite defense. So you're trying to take advantage of guys with upside against bad defenses. So that, you get Leonard at 6K. You got the guy that you can't name anymore at 5,900, and you've got Drew Pine at 5,400 against that UNC Swiss cheese defense. That all those guys are probably in play on the cheap. And then you've got Ashford likely starting for Auburn with Finley out at 5K, which is basically the minimum you'll get on DraftKings. So, I mean, kind of a dead zone there in the 6Ks, but we still have some options on the dirt cheap.
Yeah, that Oregon quarterback you mentioned, I mean, if you would have told me that he had 257 total yards and 18 pass attempts last week, I would tell you that he didn't do anything. And then he just calls his own number a couple times, and he has 3 rushing touchdowns and 2 passing touchdowns. So if you want to play him again, be my guest. I said I'd have to fall on the sword to get him a little chalky. He's not going to be chalky here. I think, if you want to play him, go ahead. I'm not going to. Drew Pine, it feels gross. Like that I put in my article, it feels very gross to play this Notre Dame offense. They just haven't been good at all, especially when you say Tyler Buckner's out, Drew Pine is out. But once again, we saw Chase Bryce and App State put up 62 points against UNC. Florida A&M put up 24. You just have to play. Yeah, that's one thing in college football, especially once you identify what defenses are bad, and UNC is a bad defense. You just attack them every single week. Last year, Michigan State, every time they were on the slate, you just played pass catchers against them because they were so terrible in the secondary. UNC is the same thing here, so Drew Pine's a great play. My favorite play at 5K is not Robbie Ashford. So he's an Oregon transfer for Auburn. He's going to get the start. He has a lot of Mike Wright vibes to me in this one. Mizzou is not that good, but I could definitely see there are more paths to him failing. He's not that accurate. He could throw a couple bombs. He's okay. Like, if you want to play him, my favorite 5K play, though, is Cam Ward. I talked about him when they played Wisconsin early in the season. Didn't think you could play him there. And he's really, getting used to the FBS level. He's a transfer in from Incarnate Word at 5K in a pass-happy offense. Oregon in a little bit of a letdown spot coming off that big win at home against BYU. I like Cam Ward a lot here, and he's a great pivot off. You see that ownership, Ashford 15%. I think Cam Ward comes in a little bit lower than that. I like Ward and GPP, and like of these 5K quarterbacks, he's my favorite play.
I think that's a really interesting call. I don't have any idea how good Oregon truly is. Like, they looked really good last week. You go back to how they looked against Georgia. Maybe Georgia's just that dominant. Obviously, they are very good. Who knows how good Oregon will be? Who knows how good Washington State will be? I mean, obviously, big surprise against Wisconsin a few weeks back. So, and I didn't even look to see. You could give me about 10 different lines on that game, and I wouldn't know what the right one was. Like, have you looked at that? I wonder what the spread is on
for Oregon, Washington State.
Yeah.
Yeah, Washington State is, and that's one of my picks on scores and on. Washington State is 6.5-point dogs at home. I think they have that line I think is too. It's a great stair step early in the season, right? We think BYU is good because they beat Baylor. Now we see Baylor against Iowa State. Like, it's just a stair step of, like, eventually towards the end of the season, it's like, oh, this was a great matchup in week 2. Now both these teams are 500. So it's very tough early in the season to not be that reactive and say, hey, this team is really good. Because after last week, it's like, shoot, BYU beat Baylor. Oregon blew BYU out at home. I mean, they should be touchdown favorites here. So I like Washington State. I think them and Wake are definitely 2 live dogs at home that could definitely win their games, and I wouldn't be that surprised.
All right, so let's go ahead and move to the running back position, where the pricing is you've definitely got like you've got a solo top tier, I guess, with Ibrahim at 9,600, and then you've got kind of a 2-man, maybe a 3-man second tier with Bijan Robinson, Blake Corum, and Miller as your upper 7K options, and then nobody else above 7,200. So, do you need to prioritize spending on one of, say, the top 3 or 4, or how are you handling those top running backs?
Yeah, Ibrahim, we saw last week. It's kind of scary that in 3 quarters he basically, is a must-have on the slate. I think people were asking if he was a bust last week at like 38 points. I'm like, when you're 9.6K, but when you're a running back and putting up those kind of points, it really doesn't matter your price. Interesting to see him in this game against actual competition. That's a lot to pay for him. I still will have some in GPPs, but I'll probably be underweight. Bijan, you see the 40%. I think he probably comes in a little bit higher than that because I think people will come down from Ibrahim. So I would venture ownership is probably going to be more like Bijan closer to 50% and Ibrahim closer to like 12 or 13% once it's all said and done, just because you do get a $1,300 discount. Blake Corum, but all 3 of these top guys from Bijan. Well, I will say that with Bijan, like, you look at the snaps too. Bijan is splitting snaps with Roschon Johnson. He's out there for all the rushing plays, but you say that Corum and Ibrahim are probably going to get all the carries to themselves. Bijan's still splitting carries, which is it's kind of like Tank Bigsby at Auburn. Very frustrating when he's probably the best running back in the country or one of them. So I'll have a lot of Bijan. Corum is a much better play. I mentioned with Edwards out because I think his volume just increases here. I'd be surprised to see him not get 20 carries here, and we've seen him break off, plays, especially with McCarthy trying to get him comfortable. I think he'll get some dump offs. So all three of these guys are definitely in play. I'll have them in my pool. Interesting to see if Corum gets a little bit more popular with the Edwards news that he's going to be out.
Yeah, I think maybe he'll get a little bit of a bump, and he's probably my second favorite behind Robinson now. Just the discount, I think, is hard to ignore. So I like both Robinson and Corum at those prices. A little bit easier to fit in. And then there's kind of a dead zone underneath those guys. Miller maybe in GPPs. Jabari Small seems healthy. So, again, maybe in GPPs. Lou Nichols is a fantastic running back. Like when we get to the max slates later in the year, Lou Nichols is going to be a stud every week. Of course, a lot of those games end up being on like Wednesdays and Thursdays, but can they stay close enough to Penn State for Lou Nichols to be viable? Again, maybe it's GPPs. I think the next guy that people will target for cash is Will Shipley, who, again, he's not going to get 25 carries either, but he's super efficient when he does get the ball. So I don't really love this mid-range a whole lot. I'll probably play a little bit of Small and Nichols and GPPs, but I don't feel like you absolutely have to. Like, do you have strong takes on these guys?
Yeah, Miller and Neal are just interesting because they're literally, I think, direct pivots off the quarterbacks who are going to be popular, like Neal with Daniels and Miller with Duggan. So I'm not going to have a ton of them, but it definitely is not out of the question that those guys, they're in a kind of a dead zone, kind of like Eric Gray was last week. DJ Jones being 7.1 Ks. Like, I just don't know what's going on there. Shipley, last year he ran for 100 yards against Wake. He actually split. Kobe Pace actually had the better day. Remember, they were splitting a lot last year, but I like Shipley a lot here. Roman Hemby, man, just waiting for him from Maryland to not have the good game. I think that's this one. He can't he's averaging like 8 yards a carry. So I'll probably have none of him, but he is interesting. I don't think he's a bad play because he is seeing a ton of snaps. And then Nick Singleton, like Penn State, like, what are you doing? Not what are you doing? Obviously, you beat Auburn last week, but they're still rotating three guys when maybe they're just trying to save him for Big Ten play, which I would get. But Nick Singleton is that. I mean, if you look at him, his stats compared to Travion Henderson last year as a true freshman at Ohio State, they're like identical. So Singleton by the end of the year is going to be that guy. Is he going to be here in a blowout? You just kind of have to see. Shivers was chalk last week. Charles McClendon also gets a big price bump. He had a good game last week. Then we get to Tank. Is PSU summed it up best saying it's like Auburn's like, yep, Tank, you're our best player. Here's 10 touches a game. Like, I don't understand why. And so if Ashford doesn't do well and like this offense can't, he had a terrible game script last week. So Tank has to have like a leading game script for that to work. Now, Missouri is not good, so I think he will. I'm going to keep playing Bigsby, but there is, he just is not involved enough for his talent, which is definitely frustrating, when you're playing him all the time. But I think the 6K range from McClellan, Bigsby, those are good play here. They're going to be popular. You're not going to get any ownership really discount on them. And Singleton, I mean, even with 10 touches, he could still go 10 for 150 and 2. So I like him in GPPs for sure.
All right. Yeah, I'm a little lower on Bigsby. Just a little bit nervous given his involvement. That, I don't know. It's just a tough sell. And if he has a bust out game, I'm going to be real pissed. But I do like McClellan a good, but I just think there's options here. So, you don't have to go with anybody like Singleton. I like a lot. Big play upside there. McClellan, I like. Who is the other guy? Oh, Tyree is another guy at 5,600 that, again, against that North Carolina defense, it feels gross to target Notre Dame with a backup quarterback and all that stuff, but it's just the matchup. And I think Tyree at 5,600 is a solid price for him as well. What do you think of Taj Brooks? Any interest in him today?
Yeah, he's going to go a little bit under the radar. I mean, usually, Texas Tech is rotating a lot at running back. And I mentioned Zach Kitley. You're not exactly targeting running backs, but he's been pretty involved in the passing game. He's at a good price point. He's in a pretty good game environment. I actually think that game environment is going to go a little bit underlooked just in terms of like the big skill players like Bijan and Jerron Bradley are going to get popular, but Smith, So I think playing Brooks is a good pivot off of some of that chalk that's going to be the Tech passing game. So if Brooks catches one, runs two in, or something like that, I definitely think he's viable this week, along with Jalen Wright. So we mentioned Jabari Small. He should go in this one, but Jalen Wright has outcarried him a lot this year. I think he's a good backup. I kind of wish he's not going to be that popular. Florida's rushing defense has not been they haven't been crazy good. I mean, Tavion Thomas did have a good game against them in game one. So, those guys are definitely in play. 5Ks has a lot of backup running backs, but then you see Tosh Brooks, who's got the backfield really to himself. So definitely some plays in that 5K range.
All right. Anything you are interested in as we get down to the punt range? Jarrell Brock, in terms of volume, is probably the guy for a lot of people, but not a fantastic matchup for him today. We've got some ownership on Schrader for Missouri. I don't see a whole lot down here. I don't think I'm until we get to, you get the bare minimum of 3K play of Reese. But do we need to go there? Do we need to go for a 3K running back today? What do you think?
I'll have some shares of Reese just because, I don't think you gain a lot from fading him. Like, he's 3K. If he puts up 50 yards, and it catches a couple balls, he's probably fine. But I don't like to really punt at running back. That's the one place where receivers, you can get a receiver catch a 80-yard bomb at 3K. Running backs, I know he had a really good game. He's a true freshman. They're going to probably want to get him work, but Iowa State is not a good environment at all. So I wouldn't fault you for playing Reese. I just don't I'm just going to be even the field on him. I don't see obviously at 3K, if he puts 20 fantasy points up, you're probably going to need him. But I don't really see the punt. I like Trevor Etienne and GPPs at 3.2K. Montrell Johnson's probably the best running back there, but Etienne is just too cheap. He's probably only going to get 8 carries, but he could definitely take one to the house. Trevor Etienne's younger brother. And then the only other guy I mentioned, Nakia Watson at 4.6K in that last game. We'll get to the wide receivers. Donovan Ollie is going to be very popular. Cam Ward, not as much. I think you can play, and I will have some stacks with Ward, Watson, and either Stribling or Ollie for Washington State. So I think Watson is definitely in play. He's going to be low owned. And in that last game, I always talk about climbing up leaderboards. If you have Donovan Ollie in the last game, which we'll get to in a second, you're not going to pass anybody up because everybody's going to have him. Watson and then Stribling will get to our two guys that in that last game you can definitely get some leverage on the field.
All right, let's move to wide receiver now, where we're so used to Downs being the most expensive guy, but Rashee Rice, just so many targets and such an efficient passing offense. How much of a must is Rashee Rice today?
If you're playing cash, you have to play him, I think. Of all these guys on Mitchell Tinsley, what other pay up option are you going to take? Quentin Johnson in a great game environment has 9 targets on the year. Josh Downs might not play. Mitchell Tinsley is still not the clear number one. So it's who are you going to pay up for? And I think Rice, he's averaging 15 targets a game. So basically, he averages more targets in a game than Johnson has all season. I still like Johnson, but I'm just comparing them, right? If you're going to spend $1,000 less on Johnson, Rice's floor here is probably 10 catches for 100 yards. So if he doesn't get in the end zone, does he kill you? Probably. But he is far and away the number one target in this offense. So I think if you're playing cash, and once again, maybe you can get some leverage on him in GPPs. I'm not going to say he's a must there, but I'm going to be well over the field at 40-50% Rice, just because he's alpha, and in DFS you don't think about those situations, right? You just play him. If he gets hurt or something like that, that's just something you have to deal with. But unless that happens, I don't see any way that he doesn't put up 20 fantasy points here.
Yeah, clearly the best spend up at the position, because he's projected 10 points above everyone else, above 6,800. So the tournament pivot, I think you go all the way down to somebody like Perry at 7K. I know you like Wake a little bit, so I presume you can get behind that today, or maybe Hyatt with their top wide receiver out. Those are a couple guys I'm looking at in the kind of right at 7K range.
Yeah, you mentioned I mean, I mentioned at the beginning, I like Baby Tua and Hartman for GPPs. And you have A.T. Perry and Raheem Jarrett sitting right there at those prices. And same thing with the ownership. So if you stack Jarrett and Baby Tua and Perry and Hartman, and that those stacks each go off for 50 or so points each, I mean, you have a huge leverage on the field. Maryland is very tough to pin down, but Jarrett would be the consistent there. No one's really going to pay up for him. But I love A.T. Perry at 100 yards plus last year, and that's with Ja'Cory Robinson there. I love Perry in this spot. Clemson's down a couple guys on the secondary. They're down their best edge rushers, which makes me feel even better about this game. So I like Perry. Hyatt, you mentioned, I didn't mention Cedric Tillman in the beginning just because it was kind of a foregone conclusion that he was going to be out. But yeah, Jalen Hyatt should get the benefit there, him and Brew McCoy. So I definitely like them. Then Xavier Hutchinson. I told Turtle earlier in the week, I think maybe like Monday or Tuesday, I was going through the slate. I'm like, man, I wonder if Hutchinson's going to be sneaky. Like he is not going to be sneaky here. People have caught on, but he has a huge target share as well. Talk about Rashee Rice. So you're getting that big target share, like a 2K, discount. Not a great game environment, but once again, he's the number one guy here. So all these guys right here in this group of four guys that you've got checked are good to go for sure.
Yeah, I really like that range as well. I think Hutchinson will be the guy that most people go to, for cash games. But the GPP upside, like Perry with Hartman, Jarrett with Tagovailoa, really interesting potential there if you think those teams can put up some numbers offensively. All right, as we go into the 6Ks, it's hard for me. Like everyone kind of went into the year thinking that Parker Washington was clearly going to be the guy at Penn State. So you see him at 6,300, and it seems like, a discount when you see, you see the other guy up with 7K plus. You've got Worthy for Texas. That feels like a bargain there, but we've had a quarterback change due to injury. So you got a little bit of unknowns here in the 6K range with how these, wide receiver groups are going to shake out. Donovan Green for Wake Forest. How many targets is he going to get compared to Perry? But another range where you can get some GPP guys in here. Who are you looking at in the 6Ks?
Yeah, Xavier Worthy. I don't know if he's going to be that popular. Like he's 15%. I wouldn't be surprised if he comes in a little bit less. I don't think I'd play him and Bijan in the same lineup, but I mean, obviously, if you think that game completely shoots out, like they're not bad plays together. It's just putting a lot of salary together. Donovan Green, the same thing. He was hurt all last year, kind of came in, hasn't been out there as much. Jamal Banks has actually been taking a lot of snaps from him. Jalen Calhoun, if you think that Duke is competitive, Calhoun is worth a play. I am really off of Duke altogether here. I think you could play Riley Leonard, but I think other than that, Kansas could come out and roll in this one. But if you think it's going to be competitive, Calhoun definitely makes sense. Then Michael Mayer, they've increased his price up. 5.9 is probably still too cheap against this UNC defense, and I think he's a great play. Even being a tight end, usually you're not always trying to target tight ends, but I think Pine, being a backup is going to go to him as much as he can. So I definitely think Myers in play here. Keon Coleman is interesting for Michigan State. They have a really tough matchup, but if Jaden Reed does not go again, Coleman, last week I think he had 2 touchdowns and 10 catches or something like that. So he's definitely in play. No one's going to play him. So that's something to monitor as well. With I think the afternoon games, Jaden Reed for Michigan State. If he's going to go, I'm probably off both of them. Maybe I play some Reed, but Keon Coleman is probably the only other guy like in that 6K to like high 5Ks that I'm really looking at.
All right. Yeah, that's just a tough kind of range for receivers. Like that's why the ownership is going to go on Mayer and it's going to go on Hutchinson. And I kind of agree with you. I don't think Worthy will maybe be quite that high, but it's just going to be spread out in here. And you're going to have, a lot of builds are going to come pre-populated with Rashee Rice at the top. And then we can come back up to the mid-range. But basically, lineups are going to be pre-populated with 1 punt and 1 spend. Like the cash game wide receiver trio is the 3 highest owned guys. It's Rice, it's Hutchinson, and it's Ollie, and it's not particularly close, I don't think, for a lot of people. So that's why there's not a whole lot of options in the 5 and 6K range. They just don't project as well on a points per dollar basis. So we can work our way back up to the other options that might be viable in the 5Ks, but I think it's worth taking a breather and talking about what do we do with Ollie here at 3,500. And I know you like the Washington State quarterback a little bit, so interesting take.
Yeah, I mean, this is just what does your lineup need, right? So Donovan Ollie is, if you just want to look at the Washington State wide receivers real quick, you've got Donovan Ollie at 3.5K. He's the leading target wide receiver for Washington State. He's just a misprice. Like there's no getting around that. So if you, let's say your lineup coming into the afternoon games, like you're basically ahead of everyone, or like you don't need to make up ground. I think leaving Ollie in there is definitely fine. And late swap, your best decision is always after the games happen, because then you said, oh, okay, I shouldn't have done this. It is interesting, though, Deshaun Stribling. So I think from his perspective, him being 4.6K, Lincoln Victor and Renard Bell, maybe. But I think it's very interesting. You might want to leave some salary, and you will have to reconstruct a lineup. But if you are trailing at the end of going into the 2:30 games, I think, and you need to make up ground, I think swapping from Ollie to Stribling, like obviously they're $1,000 difference, so it is going to take a little bit, but I think that you can definitely make up some ground at the end of the game. Like let's just say, and it's not out of the realm of possibilities, that Ollie does okay and puts up like, let's say 12 or 13 fantasy points, but let's say Stribling catches 2 touchdowns and puts up like 28. That's going to give you huge leverage on the field going forward. So it kind of depends on what you need, but I think if you're chasing later in the day, you want to separate yourselves. I don't think Stribling is going to be, especially in like single entry, Stribling is not going to be owned at all. And so I'm debating building a lineup with Stribling already in it for my main lineup, and then just being able to swap down to Ollie if I need to. But that is an intriguing situation. But if you're playing cash, I agree with you. Play those 3 guys and just call it a day, because you really don't care about the ownership there. And I think they're the 3 best point per dollar plays. So Ollie just gets a little bit interesting when you get into GPPs.
Yeah, for sure. I think you broke that down pretty well. And now we can kind of go up to, are there other guys in the 4Ks and maybe the lower 5Ks? I think Brew McCoy, Tennessee, you're probably going to see a lot of attention on Hyatt. Again, their number 1 receiver is out. So McCoy, I think he might creep up into the double digits in terms of ownership. Miles Price is getting some love. And then Cam Camper did get a little bit of a price bump on DraftKings, but at 5.6K, still mildly affordable. And Indiana has been running a lot of plays so far this year. So who are some of your favorite kind of value pivots?
Yeah, Camper was that guy like Donovan Ollie last week, right? He was just a misprice, and he got another double-digit target game. And so now I think he's just like priced appropriately at 5.6K. So especially if we get an ownership discount, I don't mind him, because Indiana, I think, is 17-point dogs in this one. So they're going to be throwing. You mentioned they do run a lot of plays. Miles Price. Speaking of misprices, Jerron Bradley for Texas Tech is a misprice at 4K. I think he might get a little bit overlooked, because if you are building like a single entry and you're saying, okay, I can play Hutchinson and Ollie and Rice at the top, then I really don't need to punt anywhere else. But Bradley is in a Zach Kitley offense, number 1 wide receiver in terms of targets. And, he's going to come in way under owned to Ollie. So that's another, I mentioned Stribling, the same team, but also Bradley might be a good pivot late too. I think people will play them together, but Bradley's going to be way less owned than Ollie, even though he's pretty cheap. I also like, I was looking at Lorenzo Styles and Braden Lindsey for Notre Dame. I don't think they're going to be that popular at all, but they definitely have big playability. And like I mentioned, you just play skill players against UNC. And so you see that, especially off of Meyer, that you get a lot of a price discount and ownership discount. So you can have 6-8% of Styles and Lindsey and still have Mayer. And I don't have it out of the question that you can't play 2 of these guys with Pine. I have some 3-player stacks for Notre Dame as well. But those are some guys I like. Javarius Johnson, 4.6K. Robbie Ashford does not have that accurate of an arm, but he does have a pretty big cannon. He played more at Oregon on the baseball field than he did in the football field. And so I predicted in my article, we'll see if that thing's true, that he's going to hook up with Johnson for a 50-plus touchdown. So Johnson's definitely in play. A direct pivot off of Donovan Ollie that I do like. Two guys from Minnesota are Dylan Wright and Bryce Spanford. You mentioned Ottman Bell is out. I would not play these guys outside of, in Ibrahim lineups, but Spanford and Wright are probably going to get a bump here. Spanford is definitely a good red zone target at tight end. So I think he's the same exact price as Ollie. Probably doesn't have near the amount of upside as him, but he could catch like 2 red zone touchdowns and be good for you there. Only other guys I'll mention is Moochie Dixon for SMU. He's a flat min at 3K, caught a touchdown last week. I think he's in play with Mordecai and a double stack, like playing Rice and Moochie Dixon, I think is definitely a good GPP play because they will be throwing it. And then Corey Deitches, the tight end for Maryland at 3.2K. Once again, probably another punt. No one's going to play him because they're playing Michigan, but we saw how much Baby Tua went to the tight end last year. So he's definitely in play as a punt on DraftKings.
All right, I am going to flip over to the Fanduel slate here. We can give us some Fanduel thoughts before we get on out of here. And again, if you want all of our premium stuff over at RotoGrinders, be sure to get the premium subscription, get your college football package, and we keep you up to date with all the news and notes in our premium Discord channel. Get you all up to date through lock. All right, so the later games on the FanDuel slate: Arkansas, Texas A&M, Wisconsin, Ohio State, Kansas State, Oklahoma, Boston College, and Florida State. 4 additional games beyond those that are on the DraftKings slate. And, it's not like there's absolute smash plays in here, but, of course, Ohio State is always interesting, and Stroud is always going to put up numbers. But maybe just some quick thoughts on some of the quarterbacks in the FanDuel games.
Yeah, these are not the best game environments when you compare. Arkansas A&M is probably going to be a rock fight, but KJ Jefferson's decently in play. Texas A&M's got some skill guys. Devin Achane is a good play. And then Evan Stewart is dirt cheap. Him and Anaya Smith. And then Ohio State, yeah. So Ryan Day last week says that JSN is not going to play unless he's 100%. So he only played 23 snaps against Toledo. There is some talk going on that like he has a torn hamstring or something in his leg. So, but if and there's a big if, he's 100% in play snaps, he's too cheap at 8.5K on FanDuel. But if he is out, Egbuka becomes a great play at 9.2K. Kansas State, Deuce Vaughn is 8.8K. He's probably too cheap for his workload because Oklahoma is going to put up points. So he's going to have a ton of, he has a lot of upside just from dump downs and hasn't really been that involved in the passing game yet. And then Dylan Gabriel probably could have broke the slate last week against Nebraska. It is criminal that I lost that over in that game because Oklahoma could have scored like 800 points themselves, but they called the dogs off. So Gabriel's a good play. And then that last game is going to be so gross. I think Florida State just tries to run the clock out, essentially. It looks like Jordan Travis is going to play, but I would, they're big favorites here. It's still a low total. I think Zay Flowers is decent on the Boston College side, and Trayshawn Ward's probably my favorite play for Florida State, just because I think they try to run the clock all the way out. And if you are playing FanDuel, Jabari Small is 6.2K, probably going to be back starting for Tennessee. And so on DraftKings, you saw he was 7K. So if you look at those equivalents, Jabari Small's price on FanDuel is basically as if he was like 4K on DraftKings. So a couple missed prices there. Tank Bigsby is cheap, but once, like Justin said, not guaranteed his workload. But 4 games later in the slate, you see the ownership though. None of these games are going to be that high owned for good reason, but definitely some spots wouldn't necessarily there's some game stack potential unless you think Arkansas and A&M shoots out, because I'll have some KJ, but just 4 additional FanDuel games, so not the best late night hammers if you're really into that.
All right. Still hear me okay?
Yep, you're good.
All right. My mic did the thing again at 10:15, so just making sure that came back okay. All right, we got a couple questions in the chat, and then we'll get out of here. NBA DFS has asked in our premium Discord chat, Richardson or Duggan in FanDuel Cash?
At first, I was thinking Daniel Richardson for Central Michigan. I was like, I don't think that's much of a
Florida Richardson,
yeah,
I believe.
Yeah. Man, that's tough. I probably say Richardson. It's very close, though. I think both of them probably have the same amount of upside, but I'd probably say Richardson.
All right, Jalen in the YouTube chat has asked about Ashford for Auburn. He is certainly fine. In cash, I think he'll be a fairly popular QB2 selection. I've still got Fanduel up here now, but if you're looking for a pivot in tournaments, Micah likes the Washington State quarterback at the same price, maybe just a touch more for GPPs. Ryan Henderson is asking, are you okay with a Reese punt in cash?
Yeah, I mean, that's fine. I mean, it opens everything up. I mean, you can probably play a lineup with, Hooker. I mean, it lets you fit in whatever you want, right? Because if you play him at 3K, what does that give you average? Gives you basically 6,700 left for everyone else in your lineup. So if you want to punt him, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that.
All right. I think the last one we got here, BHB in a DK cash. Would you prefer Corum and Tyree or Shipley and Hutchinson?
I'd say Shipley and Hutchinson. Tyree, I mean, I think he's still a good play, but he's still he is splitting time with Estime. I think that's how you pronounce his name. For Notre Dame, he's in a good environment, but like for cash, when you want to lock in that floor, I think Shipley and Hutchinson are like guaranteed to get work. So I don't think that second combo is bad necessarily, but for cash, I'd probably rather go with the safety of Shipley and Hutchinson.
All right. With that, I think we have gotten through everybody's questions, and we can go ahead and call it a show. That way I can rest my voice a little bit. Got to try to come back later and do the MLB Crunch Time show tonight with Britt. So tune in later again for that over on RotoGrinders. We've got you covered for NFL tomorrow as well. And good luck in this week of college football contests, everybody. Thanks to Micah for joining me. Thanks to Steve for producing behind the scenes. I am Justin. We'll see you back here next Saturday, same time, same place. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you later.